Welcome to Wise Mad 250, where truth matters more than popularity and emotional awareness saves lives. We don't chase gossip, we don't follow the crowd, we dig deeper, tell the real story, and help you understand the human behind the headlines. Here, knowledge meets insight, and every story is a lesson waiting to be learned. Sometimes, the most talented people are the most emotionally wounded. And sometimes the brightest spotlight hides the darkest struggles. Tonight, we are not here to judge. We are not here to counsel, defend, or excuse anyone. We are here to understand because behind every headline, behind every viral clip, behind every courtroom photograph, there is a human story complex, painful, and unfinished. This is not a story written by rumors. It is not shaped by social media outrage or fan loyalty. This story is written by court records, verified interviews, documented timelines, and real life consequences. This is the emotional journey of Chris Brown, a boy raised in a turbulent environment, discovering music as an escape before he discovered himself. A teenager launched into global fame before his mind had fully formed, before his wounds had healed, before anyone taught him how to manage power, anger, or love. He became a star admired by millions, but also a young man carrying unresolved trauma, pressure, and emotional scars that fame could not fix. This documentary does not deny talent, it does not erase harm, and it does not simplify the truth. It explores how success can arrive faster than maturity, how applause can drown out accountability, how unresolved pain, when ignored, can turn into destruction toward others and toward oneself. We will walk through moments of triumph and moments of collapse, through love that turned violent, through apologies that followed consequences, through public redemption attempts, private battles, and the long shadow that certain actions never escape. This is a story about choices, about emotional intelligence or the lack of it, about what happens when trauma meets fame without healing. Because Chris Brown's story is not just about Chris Brown, it is about every young person given power without guidance, every relationship poisoned by untreated anger, every society that celebrates talent but ignores emotional health until it's too late. As you watch, resist the urge to pick sides. Instead, listen, reflect, and ask the difficult questions about accountability, forgiveness, growth, and prevention. This documentary is brought to you by Wise Mad 250, where truth matters more than popularity, where silence is not protection, and where emotional awareness can save lives. This is not entertainment. This is a warning. This is a lesson. This is the story before the music, before the fame, and after the consequences. Chris Brown was born on the 5th of May 1989 that in Tappahannock, Virginia, a quiet rural town in the United States, far removed from the global stages he would one day command. On the surface, it was an ordinary place, but inside his home, life was far from peaceful. Chris was raised mainly by his mother, Joyce Hawkins, a woman who worked hard to provide stability in an environment where stability was often absent. His father was present in his life, but not in the way a child needs. In later interviews, Chris revealed a painful truth that would change how many people understood his story. As a child, he witnessed domestic violence inside his own home, not from a distance, not as a rumor, but as a living, breathing reality. He saw arguments turn into fear. He saw love mixed with anger. He saw silence after chaos. And this matters because psychologists agree on one critical point. Children who grow up surrounded by violence do not simply move on. They often normalize anger as communication. They learn that love can hurt. They fear abandonment yet expect betrayal. And many struggle with emotional regulation later in life not because they are evil, but because they were never taught another way. For a child, the brain is still learning how to process stress, rejection, and conflict. When violence becomes part of that learning, it wires the nervous system for survival, not peace. Chris did not grow up with therapy. He grew up with music. At a young age, he taught himself how to sing, how to dance, how to perform. Music became his escape, a place where he could control the rhythm when life felt chaotic, a space where applause replaced fear, where movement replaced helplessness. By his early teens, his talent was undeniable, but while his voice was developing, his emotional wounds were still open. And here is the truth many stories avoid. Pain that is escaped but not healed does not disappear. It waits. It waits for pressure, for intimacy, for fame, for power, for love. And when those forces arrive faster than healing, the past doesn't stay buried. It comes back often louder than the music. In 2004, everything changed. Chris Brown was just 15 years old when he was discovered by a local production team, a moment that would redirect the course of his life forever. Not long after, he was signed to Jive Records, New York City. For most teenagers, life at 15 is about school, friendships, and identity. For Chris, it became about contracts, studio sessions, and expectations far beyond his age. Then came 2005. His debut single, Run It, exploded onto the charts. It reached number one on the Billboard Hot 100, making Chris Brown the first male artist in years to debut at the top with his first single. He was 16 years old, 16 and famous worldwide. Suddenly, the world knew his name. His face was everywhere. His voice played in cars, clubs, radios, and bedrooms across the globe. And with fame came everything people think they want: money, luxury, private jets, and tour buses, crowds screaming his name, endless attention from women. But fame also brought something less visible: pressure. Pressure to perform, pressure to grow up overnight, pressure to be confident, disciplined, and emotionally stable without ever being taught how. Behind the success was still a teenage boy, a boy carrying unresolved childhood trauma, a boy whose nervous system had learned survival, not emotional regulation, a boy who had never been given the space or guidance to heal. The industry didn't ask if he was ready, it asked if he was profitable. No one stopped to say, slow down. No one said, let's address what you've been carrying. No one said, fame will magnify whatever is unresolved inside you. And that is where the danger began. Because when adult level power meets child level emotional development, the results are rarely peaceful. Chris was surrounded by managers, executives, and fans, but emotional mentorship was missing. This became mistake number one: entering adult fame with a child's emotional wounds. A mistake not unique to Chris Brown, but one repeated again and again in the entertainment industry. At 16, he had the world, but emotionally, he was still learning how to be safe, how to handle conflict, how to love without fear. And when fame accelerates life faster than healing, it doesn't just expose talent, it exposes trauma. As his fame grew, Chris entered high-profile romantic relationships early in his career. These relationships unfolded under flashing cameras, public scrutiny, and constant pressure, but behind closed doors, they carried something far more dangerous: emotional immaturity paired with unresolved pain. Like many young men who rise to fame too quickly, Chris confused key emotional concepts, not out of cruelty, but out of ignorance and unhealed trauma. He confused love with possession, believing closeness meant control, believing fear of loss justified restriction. He confused passion with dominance, mistaking intensity for intimacy, thinking raised voices meant honesty, and he confused jealousy with care, interpreting insecurity as proof of love rather than a warning sign of inner instability. These confusions did not appear overnight, they were learned, reinforced by past experiences, cultural narratives, and a lack of emotional education. Chris lacked the tools for healthy emotional communication. No one taught him how to say, I'm afraid of losing you. I feel disrespected. I'm overwhelmed. I need space without causing harm. Instead, emotions surfaced the only way he knew how. This became mistake number two. Not learning how to communicate pain safely. When words fail, emotions don't disappear. They transform. Arguments became intense, not because the issues were unsolvable, but because neither side knew how to de escalate. Silence became punishment used not to cool down, but to control and withdraw affection. And anger became expression, the loudest emotion in the room, overpowering empathy and reason. This is how emotional breakdown begins, not with violence, but with misunderstanding left unchecked. Unchecked jealousy becomes obsession. Unchecked insecurity becomes control. Unchecked anger becomes destruction. And when fame isolates a person from accountability, when yes men replace honest voices, when conflict happens under constant pressure, the situation doesn't heal, it escalates. Chris was not taught how to pause. He was not taught how to regulate. He was not taught how to walk away from emotional overload. And without those skills, love became a battlefield instead of a safe place. This chapter is not about assigning blame to fame or excusing harm through trauma. It is about understanding how unaddressed pain, combined with power and visibility, creates conditions where emotional collapse becomes likely. Because when pain has no language, it chooses action, and that choice would soon change everything. Los Angeles, California, the 8th of February 2009, the night before the Grammy Awards. It was supposed to be a moment of celebration, a weekend of success, recognition, and public triumph. Instead, it became a turning point that would define Chris Brown's life forever. Inside a car, away from cameras but not from consequence, Chris Brown and his girlfriend Rihanna began to argue. What started as a disagreement escalated. The argument turned violent. Chris physically assaulted her. This is not speculation. This is not rumor, and this is not media exaggeration. It is documented in police reports, detailed in court records, and acknowledged through legal admission. Chris Brown was arrested. He was charged, and he later pleaded guilty. The legal system responded with consequences: 5 years of probation, 180 days of community labor, mandatory domestic violence counseling, a restraining order protecting the victim. These were not symbolic punishments, they were acknowledgements of harm. This moment marked mistake number 3, allowing uncontrolled anger to become violence. Anger itself is a human emotion, but violence is a choice. And when anger is left untreated, when trauma is ignored, when emotional regulation is never learned, anger does not remain internal. It spills outward. Emotionally, this moment shattered everything. Chris Brown's public image collapsed overnight. Endorsements disappeared. Radio stations stopped playing his music. Awards were withdrawn. His name became synonymous with violence rather than talent. But beyond the public fallout was something deeper. This moment scarred his personal life permanently. Trust was broken. Relationships became defined by suspicion. Every action afterward was judged through this lens. For Rihanna, it was trauma, real, personal, and life-altering. For Chris, it was the irreversible realization that unresolved pain, left unchecked, can destroy lives, both others and one's own. This chapter is not about sympathy, it is about responsibility. No childhood trauma justifies violence. No fame excuses harm. No talent erases accountability. This was the moment when private emotional failure became public consequence, when warning signs turned into irreversible damage, when a lack of emotional control crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. And from this point forward, nothing would ever be the same. Because once anger becomes violence, the story is no longer about potential, it is about damage, accountability, and whether real change is possible after harm has been done. After the public fallout from his legal troubles, Chris Brown faced another battle, this time with himself. He later admitted to using alcohol and drugs as a way to cope with the stress, the shame, and the emotional pain he had carried for years. At first glance, substances can feel like a refuge, a temporary escape, a way to quiet the memories, the anxiety, and the anger, but pain does not disappear simply because it is drowned. It lingers, it festers, it grows louder, and it finds ways to surface in unexpected moments, sometimes in the form of reckless decisions, explosive arguments, or self destructive behavior. Substances don't erase trauma, they amplify emotions, they magnify fear, jealousy, and insecurity, making a person act impulsively, often in ways they would never choose when sober. This became mistake number 5, numbing pain instead of confronting it. During this period, Chris's personal relationships reflected the chaos within. They were unstable, they were chaotic, they were often short lived, leaving patterns of heartbreak and mistrust in their wake. Behind the parties, the public appearances, and the chart topping hits, there was a young man struggling to face the emotions he had buried since childhood. This chapter is a stark reminder. No amount of fame or talent can protect someone from unresolved pain. Avoiding it may feel easier in the moment, but the consequences always follow. Chris's journey during this time shows that when trauma is ignored and coping mechanisms are destructive, it doesn't just affect the individual, it shapes every relationship, every choice, and every opportunity for growth. As Chris's career continued, his personal life became increasingly complicated. He struggled with infidelity, jealousy, and control issues patterns that repeated themselves across relationships. On the surface, it might look like he didn't care or that he was incapable of love, but the truth is more complex. Chris did feel love deeply, intensely, sometimes recklessly. The problem was not the absence of feeling, it was the absence of trust in himself emotionally. He doubted his ability to communicate, to remain patient, to manage insecurity without lashing out, and in that doubt, he sought something he could never truly find outside: validation. This became mistake number 6, seeking validation instead of healing. Each relationship became a mirror of his own unresolved pain. Each breakup reinforced the belief that he was alone, that he was flawed, that he could not be trusted by himself or by others. And as he searched for reassurance, for approval, for love, he often looked in the wrong places. Fame, attention, and affection became substitutes for self-understanding. Each failed relationship deepened emotional isolation. Each argument, betrayal, and reconciliation created layers of mistrust, not just toward others, but toward himself. Behind the headlines of romantic drama and tabloid gossip was a man repeating the same cycle, desiring connection, yet unable to maintain it because the emotional foundation was never secure. This pattern illustrates a painful truth. Talent and success do not heal wounds. Love alone does not fix trauma. And seeking validation without addressing the pain underneath only delays the inevitable reckoning. Chris's journey in love during this period shows that emotional healing is not optional, it is essential. Without it, every relationship becomes a reflection of unresolved childhood pain. As Chris's career progressed, he increasingly turned to social media to express himself. Twitter and Instagram, 2011, 2017. At first, it seemed harmless, a place to connect with fans, share music, or vent frustrations. But for someone carrying unresolved trauma, it became a stage for private pain. Chris would post messages about heartbreak, betrayal, anger, and emotional struggles. Sometimes cryptic, sometimes raw, sometimes defensive. This became mistake number 7, publicizing private wounds. What is meant to be an outlet can quickly become a trap. When pain is displayed publicly, it is no longer private, it becomes a performance. Fans, critics, and the media all weigh in, offering judgment, speculation, or criticism. Instead of relief, the posts often magnify the pain. Each like, comment, or retweet carried validation but also exposure. Each public display of vulnerability invited scrutiny rather than support. Public judgment does not heal. It hardens emotional scars. It reinforces shame, insecurity, and self doubt. It teaches the mind that emotional pain is something to hide, justify, or defend, never resolve. It forced accountability. It forced him to ask hard questions. Who am I? Why do I hurt others? How do I break this pattern before it continues? Healing finally began, but late. The years of accumulated pain and public mistakes could not be erased overnight. Therapy, self reflection, and conscious effort were required. This moment in his life shows a critical lesson. Acknowledging the need for help is the first step toward true growth. Waiting too long, however, allows pain to leave a lasting mark not just on oneself but on everyone around you. For Chris, fatherhood became both a challenge and a catalyst, a painful reminder of past failures, but also a chance to begin healing truly and intentionally. This story is not about canceling Chris Brown. It is not about vilifying a person for mistakes made in youth or under pressure. It is not about assigning blame as entertainment. It is about learning before it's too late. Because love is powerful, but love is also delicate. Love is not shouting. It is not about dominating someone else to feel secure. It is not control. And it is certainly not pain. Love requires awareness, patience, and care. And before we can truly love someone else, we must first understand ourselves. If you are angry, pause. Do not let it dictate your words or your actions. If you are jealous, reflect. Do not let fear of loss become a weapon. If you are wounded, heal before you love. Do not carry trauma into relationships and expect it to disappear. Emotions are signals. They are not enemies. Pain is not a reason to hurt others, it is a reason to pay attention. Be attentive to what you feel. Learn to name your emotions. Learn to manage them before they manage you. Trust, love, but only with responsibility. Because love without responsibility becomes chaos, and pain without attention becomes violence. Chris Brown's story is a cautionary tale, not a condemnation. It reminds us that talent and opportunity cannot replace emotional maturity. It reminds us that every choice has a consequence. And it reminds us that healing is a process, one that cannot be rushed, ignored, or avoided. This is the lesson his life teaches us. We can rise, fall, and still grow, but only if we face our pain, seek help, and carry love responsibly. This documentary was produced by Wisemad 250 to remind the world. Talent does not excuse harm. Pain does not justify violence. And love, real love, requires emotional discipline. Wisemad 250, where truth builds wiser hearts.